Today we'll be going over the second or the third part of our genocide informational text. So the Great Leap Forward and Cultural Revolution in China. It was impossible to determine precisely how many people died at the hands of the communists when they came to power in 1949 in China and in the decades that followed. The estimate ranges anywhere from 45 to 70 million people perished. Commonly known as Chairman Mao, he was the founder of the People's Republic of China, and for his 27 years in power from 1949 to his death in 1976, the greatest cruelty under his rule was in 1958, where his 5-year plan called the Great Leap Forward caused 30 million farmers and peasants to starve to death, the largest known famine in history. The Great Leap Forward was when China's leader Mao Zedong's attempt at agricultural modernization and social engineering led to the mass starvation between 1958 and 61 and the death of many former landowners. While not a specific effort to eradicate a population, unlike the Holocaust, what made it genocidal in nature was the fact that Mao continued his policies long after they were obviously proven to be disastrous, thereby dooming millions of peasants to starvation. The second great genocide was a result of what was called the Cultural Revolution of 1966 to 76, was a bloody purge of anti-government elements that left millions dead or languishing in prison camps throughout China. An estimated 30 million Chinese also died during the Great Proletarian Cultural Revolution in 66 and 69. It was only upon the death of Mao that the worst of the killings ended, though the brutal crushing of the Tiananmen Square protesters in 1989 demonstrated that Beijing's violent tendencies did not entirely die with the man. So this is a famous picture of a protest that they're referring to the Tiananmen Square, where protesters were killed. So the last genocide that we're going to talk about happened in our own land. It was the atrocities against Native Americans. And so it estimated that 12,000 years ago, a mass migration of nomadic people traveled across a land bridge that connected Asia to what is now Alaska. And these people would come to be called Native Americans. And they numbered over 50 million. They settled from the top of North America to the bottom of South America. By the time Christopher Columbus reached the Caribbean in 1492, historians estimate that there were 10 million indigenous people living in the United States territory, but by 1900, the number went from 10 million to less than 300,000. Europeans' expansion into North America, whether to find gold, escape religious persecution, or to start a new life, led to the destruction of Native American livelihoods. Disease was a major killer, followed by malnutrition. Colonists in search of gold staged violent ambushes on tribal villages, fueling animosity with natives. Several wars broke out between tribes and American settlers, which led to a large death tolls, land dispossession, oppression, and blatant racism. The most significant reason for natives' decline was disease, an invisible killer that wiped out 90% of the population. Unlike Europeans and Asians, whose lifestyle had long history of sharing close quarters and domesticated animals. So Europeans and Asians lived close together and they had animals that were domestic. Native Americans were not immune to the pathogens spread by cows, pigs, sheep, goats, and horse. And so as a result, millions were killed by measles, influenza, whooping cough, diphtheria, typhus, the bubonic plague, cholera, no, I think that's right, scarlet fever, and syphilis. Spreading disease was not always intentional on the part of the colonists, so that's why it's debatable whether this was a genocide or not, because a genocide is intentional, and so a lot of this may not have been intentional. But there were a few instances that do confirm Europeans' attempt to exterminate natives. In 1763, a particularly serious uprising threatened British garrisons in Pennsylvania. So they were worried about limited resources, and they driven out by atrocities committed by some Native Americans. Sir Geoffrey Amherst, commander-in-chief of the British forces in North America, wrote to Harry Bouquet at Fort Pitt, Colonel Henry Bouquet, you will do well to try to inoculate the Indians with smallpox by means of blankets, as well as to try every other method that can serve to extirpate this execrable race. So consequently, settlers spread smallpox intentionally, on purpose, to Native Americans by distributing blankets that were previously owned by contagious patients. And so, because of that, some people believe that this was a genocide. There were also cultural clashes between European settlers and natives that lasted for over 400 years. Small battles, large-scale wars, and forced labor systems on large estates, also known as encomiendas, took a large toll on the native populations. Throughout the Northeast, proclamations to create redskins, or scalps, of Native Americans were common during war and peacetime. According to 1775 Phips proclamation in Massachusetts, King George II of Britain called for subjects to embrace all opportunities of pursuing, captivating, killing, and destroying all and every of the aforesaid Indians. Colonists were paid for each Penobscot native they killed. £50 for an adult male scalp, 25 for adult female scalp, and 20 for scalps of boys and girls under the age of 12. These proclamations explicitly displayed the settlers' intent to kill, a major indicator of genocidal acts. So while we are done with our genocide examples, we're going to look at a survivor of the Holocaust, Elie Wiesel. He was an activist, and he tells us how we can combat genocide and what we can do to stop this atrocity from happening. So I will start another video describing Elie Wiesel's great works.